All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, excited for this one.
This time around, we're tackling something that I think a lot of people, I know I've definitely struggled with this in the past, this feeling that creativity is something that you're either born with or not. Like, oh, those artsy types, they're just naturally creative. Like Richard St. John talks about that, those geniuses get to have the super ideas, but, I'm stuck here with my regular brain.
Totally. It's like a myth that persists, that creativity is some kind of special gift, like, I don't know, being double jointed or something. You either got it or you don't.
Right.
Yeah.
But what's really exciting about all the stuff we've been looking at for this episode is that it actually suggests that's totally wrong. Like, anyone can have those light bulb moments. It's not some magical ability.
Exactly. Anyone can generate incredible ideas. It's all about learning the techniques and practicing them, really.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to dive deep into some of the most practical and actually surprisingly simple ways to boost your own idea generation.
Yeah.
We've been poring over all these transcripts, TED Talks, all sorts of super interesting stuff, and we've pulled out some actionable strategies that you can literally start using today.
Yeah.
No joke.
No joke. It's going to be fun, too. So get ready to unlock your inner creative genius.
Yeah. All right. So first things first, I think it's helpful to start with what we're even talking about when we say creativity, right? Like, what does that even mean? We've all heard that saying, think outside the box.
Oh, yeah, all the time, especially in brainstorming sessions.
Totally. It's like the go-to phrase for sparking creativity. Giovanni Carrasa, he actually talks about this in one of his TEDx talks, how it's often used as this kind of offhand instruction, like, all right, team, time to get creative, think outside the box.
Yeah, like it's that easy. Just flip a switch and boom, creative genius activated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Carrasa makes this really interesting point, which is that sometimes the most simple-sounding instructions are actually the hardest to carry out.
Oh, yeah. It's like those things you think should be so simple, but then you try to actually do them, and you're like, wait a minute, this is way more complicated than I thought.
Totally. Like, he uses this example of breathing with your diaphragm. It's supposed to be the most natural way to breathe, but mastering it, that's a whole technique in itself. Even professional singers have to work at it. So just telling someone to think differently doesn't suddenly rewire their brain.
It's so true. It's like, okay, think differently, but how? Where do I even start?
Right. So Carrasa actually offers this really insightful way of thinking about what this box actually is. He says it's not our mind as a whole, but more like a kind of boundary within our thinking. It's that space of what we already know and understand, and then everything beyond that is like uncharted territory.
So it's that comfort zone, right? This stuff we're familiar with, the ideas we've already encountered. And then there's this whole universe of possibilities outside of that, the stuff we haven't even considered yet.
Exactly. And Carrasa makes this really compelling case for why stepping outside of that box is actually crucial. Like, it's not just some fluffy concept for artists and innovators. He actually argues that it's essential for our individual dignity.
Whoa. That's a pretty powerful statement.
Right. And when you think about it, it makes sense. In today's world, we all have access to pretty much the same information thanks to the internet. So what sets us apart?
That's the key question. If we're all just regurgitating the same ideas, what makes us unique? What makes us valuable?
Right. Carrasa says that our true value comes from what we do with that information, how we interpret it, how we connect it, and how we generate something new from it. If we all just stick with the same safe, predictable ideas, what he calls convergent information, we're basically just echoes of each other.
Yeah, it's like a choir where everyone is singing the same note. It's not very interesting, is it?
Exactly. And that's where divergent information comes in. This is the kind of information that can actually lead to real innovation, the stuff that makes a difference. It's the stuff that might seem a little weird, a little wrong, or even totally unrelated at first glance.
Oh, yeah, like those ideas that make you go, huh, what are you talking about? But then something clicks and you're like, wait a minute, that's actually kind of brilliant.
Exactly. It's all about shaking things up, introducing that element of surprise, the unexpected twist that forces our brains to create new pathways.
And it works because our brains are wired for patterns, We try to make sense of the world by finding connections and putting things into categories. But when we encounter something unexpected, it disrupts those patterns and forces us to reevaluate, to make new connections.
Totally. So we've established why it's important to think outside the box, but the big question is, how do we actually do that? How do we escape that box and generate those game-changing ideas?
Well, luckily, the material we've been looking at actually gives us some pretty concrete strategies for doing just that.
Yeah. Richard St. John, in his talk, He lays out 4 surprisingly simple ways to spark great ideas. And the first one, believe it or not, is to have a problem.
Uh-huh. Have a problem. Isn't that what we're trying to avoid?
Right. It sounds counterintuitive, but think about it. How many inventions and innovations were born out of a need, a frustration, a problem that needed solving?
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like necessity is the mother of invention. Right.
Exactly. St. John gives this great example of Richard Branson, the Virgin guy. He was stuck at the airport, flight was canceled, and instead of just getting annoyed like everyone else, he saw it as a problem to be solved. And his solution, he chartered a plane and sold tickets to the other stranded passengers. And guess what? That was basically the start of Virgin Atlantic.
Wow. That's a pretty good example of turning a personal annoyance into a massive success story.
Right. And then there's Sam Smith, the singer. He wrote Stay With Me after a really bad breakup. And that song, fueled by his heartbreak, went on to win multiple Grammys.
Yeah.
It just goes to show that even our own personal struggles, our emotions, they can be powerful sources of creativity.
Yeah, it's like channeling that energy, that frustration into something positive, something productive.
So I want you, listening right now, think about a problem that you're facing. It could be in your work, in your personal life, whatever. Could this be an opportunity to generate a new idea, a new solution?
It's a really interesting way to reframe those challenges, isn't it? Instead of seeing them as roadblocks, see them as opportunities.
Exactly. Okay, so next up, St. John's second way to spark super ideas is to listen. And he actually says this awesome line, ears are Wi-Fi for ideas.
That's such a good analogy. So true, too.
Right. And he tells this amazing story about Dr. Jean Carruthers, who discovered the cosmetic use of Botox. And get this, it all started because one of her patients casually mentioned that her forehead wrinkles disappeared after receiving Botox for eyelid spasms. Like, just a random comment. But because Dr. Carruthers was really listening, she picked up on it and boom, multi-billion-dollar industry.
That is wild. Just imagine all the amazing ideas that we might be missing out on just because we're not truly listening.
It's a good reminder to really pay attention to what people are saying, even those little seemingly insignificant details. You never know what might spark an idea. All right, St. John's third tip is to look around. This is all about the power of observation.
Okay, so being more present, taking in the details of our surroundings. I can get behind that.
Yeah. And he uses this perfect example of Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist. This guy had a major scientific breakthrough, a real aha moment just from watching a spinning plate in a cafeteria.
Wait, seriously, just from watching a plate spin, most people would just be thinking about what they're going to eat.
Right. But Feynman, he saw the underlying principles of physics at play. It's about looking beyond the surface, noticing those patterns and details that others might miss. Feynman actually said that IQ, spelled A-Y-E, often wins over IQ.
That's interesting. It's not just about being smart in the traditional sense, but being observant, curious, engaged with the world around you.
Exactly. All right, are you ready for St. John's biggest secret for generating super ideas?
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Drum roll, please. It's to write down your ideas.
Haha, okay, that sounds pretty simple. But I guess it makes sense. How many times have I had a brilliant idea only to completely forget it later?
Right. It happens to all of us. Larry Page, the co-founder of Google, he actually woke up one morning with the entire concept for Google in his head. And he knew that if he didn't write it down immediately, he might forget it. He even said, when a really great dream shows up, grab it.
Yeah, it's like those ideas are fleeting. You have to capture them before they disappear.
So to recap St. John's 4 points. Have a problem, listen, look around, and write it down. Simple, but super effective. Now let's build on that and look at another really fascinating perspective on creativity from the next core video, this idea of idea stacking.
Idea stacking. That sounds interesting. Tell me more.
So we've seen that creativity isn't about just waiting for inspiration to strike. It's about actively engaging with the world around us, identifying problems, paying attention, and capturing those initial thoughts. Idea stacking takes it a step further and explores how we can actually build on those initial thoughts and generate even more innovative ideas.
So it's like taking those little sparks of inspiration and turning them into something bigger, something more impactful.
Exactly. And what's really cool about idea stacking is that it challenges this notion of pure originality. That idea that truly creative work has to come from a completely blank slate. Idea stacking suggests that most groundbreaking ideas are actually new combinations of existing ones.
Oh, I like that. So it's less about reinventing the wheel and more about taking those existing wheels and building something completely new with them.
Exactly. They give some great examples in the next core video. Steve Jobs didn't invent the touchscreen, the phone, or the internet. but he brilliantly combined them into the iPhone. Shakespeare, arguably one of the greatest writers of all time, he borrowed plots and storylines and turned them into his own timeless masterpieces. Even Einstein built upon the existing framework of physics. It's all about taking what's already there and finding new ways to put it together.
It makes you realize that creativity isn't always about coming up with something completely brand new, but about seeing those existing pieces in a new light, finding those unexpected connections.
Totally. So the next core video actually breaks down idea stacking into 3 key steps. The first one is to absorb relentlessly.
Absorb relentlessly. What does that mean?
It basically means feeding your brain with as much diverse information as possible. Reading, watching documentaries, listening to podcasts on different topics, just constantly exposing yourself to new ideas and concepts. They actually say the more raw material you have, the easier it is to connect the dots.
Right, so it's like gathering all the ingredients before you start cooking. The more ingredients you have, the more creative you can be with your recipes.
Exactly. But they also emphasize that it's not just about passively consuming information. It's important to start creating, even if it's basic, alongside all that absorption.
So it's not just about filling your head with information, but about actually doing something with it.
Right. It's about experimenting, playing around, trying things out, even if they seem simple at first. That's how you figure out what works, what doesn't, and what really sparks your interest. The second step in idea stacking is to write down interesting ideas.
Okay, so that echoes St. John's point about writing down ideas, but this seems a little different.
Right. It's not just about capturing your own ideas, but also those from external sources. Anything that grabs your attention, a random fact you learned, a cool marketing campaign you saw, a quote that really resonated with you, write it down. It could be a potential fuel for a future creative breakthrough.
It's like building a library of inspiration, a collection of all those little sparks that could ignite something bigger later on.
Exactly. And the third and arguably most crucial step is to find unexpected connections. This is where the magic really happens. It's about actively asking yourself, how can I mix these different ideas? What happens if I apply this concept to that seemingly unrelated problem?
So it's about making those leaps, bridging those gaps between different fields, different concepts, different ways of thinking.
Exactly. The next core video gives this awesome example of James Dyson, the guy who invented the bagless vacuum cleaner. He combined the technology of a vacuum cleaner with industrial cyclones, two seemingly completely unrelated things, and created a revolutionary product.
That's so cool. It makes you realize that the most innovative ideas often come from those unexpected mashups.
Right. And they also give this example of brainstorming a unique location for a podcast recording. What if, instead of the typical studio, you combined it with the atmosphere of a forest or ancient ruins? Pushing those seemingly absurd combinations can lead to some really fresh and exciting perspectives.
It's like challenging the norms, questioning those default settings.
Exactly. Another way to think about this is to take a common object, like a chair, and apply a divergent modifier to it, like make it float. Now, a floating chair might not be practical, but the point is that by forcing ourselves to think differently about something so familiar, we can break free from those mental constraints and open up a whole new world of possibilities.
That's a really cool exercise. It's like taking those mental leaps, even if they seem silly at first. You never know where they might lead you.
Exactly. And it brings us back to Karaz's idea of injecting divergent modifiers into our thinking.
Yes, that was a really insightful concept. Remind me how that works again.
So he uses the example of TEDx conferences, which we all know and love. He takes those familiar elements, the convergent elements, like engaging speakers and impressive venues, and then he applies divergent modifiers to them, like exaggeration or elimination.
Okay, so it's like taking those core elements and then twisting them, stretching them, pushing them to their limits.
Exactly. For example, he takes the grand setting and exaggerates it to the scale of a stadium, which you might think would be totally impractical for a TEDx talk. But then he flips it and imagines incorporating TEDx talks into an event that's already happening in a stadium, like a halftime show at a football game.
Wow, that's such a cool idea.
Right. Or he takes the good speakers element and eliminates it altogether. This leads to some interesting thought experiments, like what if the speakers were chosen randomly from the audience? Or what if there were duets of speakers on stage? Again, it's not necessarily about finding the perfect, immediately viable idea, but about stretching our thinking and exploring those unexpected avenues.
Like shaking up the formula, breaking those conventions.
Totally. And Karatza also talks about the importance of the environment and mindset when it comes to nurturing creativity. He makes this really important point that If we're in a context where mistakes are punished or ridiculed, people are naturally going to be hesitant to take risks, to venture outside of that mental box. That fear of failure can be a real creativity killer.
That makes so much sense. If you're constantly worried about being wrong, you're not going to be very open to suggesting something new, something different, even if it has the potential to be amazing.
Right. And he also talks about the importance of being open to seemingly irrelevant information, encouraging the mixing of different disciplines. It's often those unexpected juxtapositions that spark the most innovative ideas.
Yeah, it's like cross-pollination of ideas. The more diverse your sources of inspiration, the more creative you can be.
Exactly. And there's this interesting bit in the In 59 Seconds video that suggests even subtle environmental cues, like having pictures of nonconformity in your workspace, might actually boost creative thinking. It might be subconscious, but it's still fascinating to think about.
It makes you wonder about the subtle influences that shape our thinking. Maybe we don't even realize how much our environment is impacting our creativity.
Totally. And Corazza also talks about those internal barriers that we often put up ourselves. You know, that feeling like we're not qualified to come up with something new, or that if an idea were truly good, someone else would have already thought of it.
Oh yeah, I've definitely felt that before. It's like this self-doubt that creeps in and stops you from even trying.
Right. But we have to actively challenge those limiting beliefs. Fresh perspectives and new combinations are always possible, no matter who you are or what your background is.
It's about giving ourselves permission to be creative, to experiment, to take risks.
Totally. And finally, Corazza emphasizes the importance of long thinking, allowing ideas the time and space to develop, to connect, to evolve over time. It's like appreciating a complex piece of music or a poem. You have to let it wash over you, let it sink in.
That's a beautiful analogy. It's about resisting that pressure for instant gratification, that need for immediate solutions, and embracing the journey of exploration, the process of letting those ideas simmer and develop naturally.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways? I think it's pretty clear that creativity isn't this magical gift that only a few lucky people possess. It's a skill, a muscle that can be developed.
Yeah, it's about being proactive, being intentional about cultivating our creativity.
And we've learned that it often starts with a need, a problem that needs solving, fueled by attention, through listening and observation, and then solidified by action, by actually capturing those ideas and putting them into some kind of form.
And the great thing is that we have all these tools and techniques at our disposal. From St. John's simple yet powerful 4 steps to the more elaborate idea stacking method, there are so many ways to unlock our creative potential.
And it's really encouraging to see that even small changes in how we approach things, like being more open to those unexpected connections, cultivating an environment that supports creativity, these can all have a big impact on our ability to generate new ideas.
So, to our listeners, we challenge you to pick 1 or 2 of the techniques that resonated with you today and give them a try this week. Experiment, play around, see what happens.
Now that you have all these tools in your mental toolkit, what unexpected combinations of ideas might you uncover? What problem could you solve in a completely new way? How can you bring some of that divergent information into your thinking?
The possibilities are endless. The potential for creative breakthroughs is within each and every one of us. Embrace the process, stay curious, stay open to the unexpected, and you might just surprise yourself with the amazing ideas you can come up with.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive, everyone. See you next time.